This is Michael Popok. Look how dark it is. It must be legal AF after dark. Georgia. We had a lot of hope for the Georgia prosecution of Donald Trump. We thought it was going to actually go to trial first. Now it looks like it's going to be going to trial last, if not at all. It may not go at all, especially based on a new ruling by the Georgia Appellate Court, the second highest court in Georgia, that has stopped the continued prosecution of Donald Trump in the trial court level in Fulton County, putting it all on ice and putting a pin in it until they hear oral argument in, get ready for this, October. And then they have until March 2025 to rule. This case is not being tried. I talk about it with my colleague on Wednesdays on Legal AF, Karen Friedman, Agnifilo. Take a listen. Let's switch gears now and go to the other case we keep talking about in contrast to everything, because she just finds a way to contrast herself with everything, is Judge Cannon. The Mar-a-Lago case started with a search warrant 2 years ago. And now we're still jerking around and around in June of 2024, not even talking about a trial date anywhere on the horizon. We're talking about, I think it's interesting whether the special counsel has been properly appointed or not, or funded properly. And there's a recent Supreme Court decision about the funding of the Consumer Protection Board. That seems very interesting, not related at all. And I want to hear comment on that. And there's people here that have filed amicus briefs and they want to be heard, and mainly Trumpers. I think that's interesting. Why don't we all get together? Let me look at my calendar. Why don't we all get together on the 27th or the 23rd of June, and let's talk about these things. Fundamentally, whether the prosecution should have even happened because a special counsel was improperly appointed and improperly funded. That's interesting. To whom? First of all, let's start there. And then, if she ever picks her way through that gauntlet of her own creation, minefield of her own creation, if the case survives that, then it will be, then appeals, of course, that would result from that. And that's what the Jack Smith's been waiting for. Then it's the gag order is also interesting. I don't think you filed it appropriately, the prosecution, the first time. I think you needed to redo that, and then delay. And they finally got around to filing it appropriately the way she liked it, with all the hospital corners and creases the way she exactly liked it. And she, okay, we'll get around to that. How about also, we'll do that on the 23rd too. So that delays the eventual appeal. That's now another, 20 days away, whatever it is. And then also, I think it's interesting whether Donald Trump, this is the judge talking, I think it's interesting whether Donald Trump should be able to interrogate and depose in a criminal case the prosecution and the Department of Justice, and whether they should get more documents from these entities about the execution of the search warrant and his having stolen documents from the American people, including those consisting of national defense information documents. This case is quickly, in the mind of Judge Cannon, rapidly becoming not about the criminal defendant named Donald Trump and what he did, and is becoming an indictment of the special counsel and their conduct. Same special counsel that's in other courts, same Department of Justice that's been litigating cases for hundreds of years, but to Judge Cannon, the upside down world that she's created, they're constantly on their back foot, and every request that's made by Donald Trump is complied with by this judge, and she finds in an artful way, and it's not by accident, it's by purposeful calculation, to just make enough rulings that aren't rulings, paper orders that aren't orders, dates and deadlines that don't get canceled, they get extended, to stop Jack Smith from going to the 11th Circuit and asking for her removal and to have her reversed. And that is in sharp contrast to what's going on against the son of a Democratic president, about gun charges and whether he filled out a form or not appropriately when he was using drugs for a gun that he held for 11 days. So, Karen, why don't you, from a prosecutor standpoint and from all that, why don't you talk about what you're observing with Cannon and where you think that case ends up before November? And then you want to touch on what's happening with Delaware federal court with the president's first son, Hunter Biden.
Yeah, look, I find this hard to analyze because this doesn't look like anything remotely resembling a normal prosecution or anything in the criminal justice system. This is the most head-scratching, perplexing series of non-decisions that I've ever seen anywhere. I mean, this latest series of rulings or whatever they're called, paperless orders, are just unbelievable to me. So just going back to this gag order request, just to contrast what's going on. This was an emergency request that the special counsel made. This was previously, but I want to contrast that with what's happening now. About a week ago, saying Donald Trump has put federal agents' lives on the line, put a target on their back, because he is going out saying that when the search warrant was executed at Mar-a-Lago, that they were authorized to assassinate him. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. There have now been congressional hearings where they talk about it and people have to talk about it. This is just an absurd assertion, and it's a lie. And what does she do when they make this request? Rather than putting a gag order or putting it on the calendar right away, okay, I see how urgent this is. This is lives on the line. I'm going to reject it because there was no what's called meet and confer, which is the parties are required in her jurisdiction and her local rules to do what's known as meet and confer and try and work it out first. And then if they can't work it out, then they indicate that in their papers. Well, based on everything people were saying about it, I just assumed there was no meet and confer. Well, actually, Jack Smith tried to meet and confer, and what did they say? Sorry, it's Memorial Day weekend, we're busy, we can't do it. And if I'm Jack Smith, I'm like, okay, but this is an emergency. I'm sorry that you won't meet and confer. And they put that in their motion, that this was their lame excuse. But this is urgent, so Judge, I need you to do this anyway. And what does she do? Oh, we're going to brief it. We're going to have a hearing. We're going to talk about this. Never, right? What else has she not ruled on yet? CIPA. There's still so many of these Classified Information Protection Act documents that, again, national security information. They have to have hearings about whether or not, what documents can come in, what can't, whether you can sanitize them, et cetera, to protect our secrets in this prosecution. She hasn't ruled on any of those either. Somehow that's not urgent. But you want to know what she's put on this calendar? You want to know what she thinks is important to stop the proceedings and stop this trial from happening? What did she calendar? This hearing to oral arguments to be able to discuss whether or not Jack Smith and special counsel in the special counsel's office was appropriately created and appointed, et cetera. Well, guess what? The special counsel is something that's been around for and upheld by countless district courts across the country, countless circuit courts across the country, and even, guess what, the United States Supreme Court. But no, Judge Cannon, who has been reversed twice in this case by the 11th Circuit, who's been on the bench for a hot minute, and who clearly is trying to do Trump's bidding at this point. I was trying to say for a long time and say, oh, she's inexperienced. Oh, she doesn't know, she's new. There's no excuse anymore, no excuse that she would now, we have to have a hearing to determine this because baby Judge Cannon, who just got here and doesn't know anything, has been reversed twice, I'm going to discover something different than everybody else, number one. And number two, I'm going to allow something that I didn't even know was a thing. It's so rare, which is that these friends of the court, the amicus, who people submit amicus briefs all the time. What they do is they ask permission from the court to be able to submit amicus briefs. And usually the court says yes. And she's allowing that. She's also allowing them to give oral arguments. They're not parties to the case. There's going to be strangers who have nothing to do with this, who are going to get to come to court and do oral arguments in addition to the parties. And that's what they're going to waste valuable court time doing, not doing any of the pretrial motions that need to happen to get this trial to go forward. So And the one thing she's doing is she's not ruling anything, because if she rules something, it goes up on appeal, especially in SEPA, right? If she makes the wrong ruling in SEPA, that's definitely appealable by the special counsel's office. The prosecution can do that. It automatically gives them a right to appeal. The statute even says it. And so guess what? Next time, rather than reversing her, I think they actually yank her off the case, because this is ridiculous. I can't analyze this from a legal standpoint, because this doesn't have any resemblance to what actually happens in the law, in my experience. This is just a head scratching, talk about a judge that's conflicted and is absolutely partisan and not objective. That is Eileen Cannon. It is not Juan Merchan or Tanya Chutkin or any of the other, Arthur Engoron or Lewis Kaplan, not any of the other judges who have tried Donald Trump in the last year. Those are judges who are just normal judges, right? Eileen Cannon is as some people say, a complete loose cannon.
Yeah, and that trial is not going to happen before November. So, which is probably the simplest of the trial. I mean, the one that had the case that has the least moving parts, unlike even New York, is the Mar-a-Lago case. It's all Donald Trump. It's all Donald Trump with his fingerprints on the retention of the presidential records, not presidential records, the failure to return national defense information, top secret and classified, being caught, pardon me, red-handed with it, his conversations. Well, let me touch on that for a minute. Conversations with his lawyers that have been turned over because the attorney-client privilege has been stripped away from him. That's another issue that has not yet been decided. Pardon me, guys. Swallowed a bug there. Is the motion to suppress the evidence that they brought, arguing that somehow the search warrant was invalid, the way it was executed was invalid, and everything they found there should be suppressed. And, pardon me, trying to revisit the decision by Judge Beryl Howell, the Chief Justice of the D.C. Circuit Court, which she's like on the Mount Rushmore of D.C. and other judges, being called into question by Judge Cannon, who's been on the bench for like a hot minute. When Judge Beryl Howell, after an evidentiary hearing, decided that it was more likely than not that Donald Trump and his original lawyer related to Mar-a-Lago, Evan Corcoran, had committed a crime or a fraud, and therefore the attorney-client privilege would be stripped away from Donald Trump, and 50 pages of single-space notes by Evan Corcoran, his musings that he put into a recording, would all be turned over to the prosecution. Well, that issue's coming back up with now Judge Cannon. Oh, heaven help us about what she's going to do. And whatever she does, and I agree with you, the end game here that this is leading towards is a series of decisions that are appealable by Jack Smith, and that the 11th Circuit is likely chomping at the bit to get their hands on to reverse and or reassign her off the case. But by that time, by my watch, it's going to be well after November. And what we're still waiting on, even on this late recording, this late date of this recording of this live legal AF, is the decision by the United States Supreme Court, who took oral argument on the immunity decision, which has been holding up the prosecution of Donald Trump in the DC election interference case before Judge Chutkin for for the last 9 months. And of course, they took the oral argument the last day of the last oral argument in April, before they shut the doors to oral arguments at the Supreme Court. And we have been waiting since the end of April for them to decide. Now, let me answer the questions in the chat. Yes, the Supreme Court has to make a decision now that they've taken the appeal, the briefing's done, and they've issued an oral argument. Yes, it has to be this term. And the end of the term, technically for issuing the opinions, is when they all decide they're all leaving on their summer vacations. It's usually around now. It'll be sometime between now and next week, next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. By mid-June, This gate is closed. Term is over. Opinions issued. We're waiting on opinions, as I teased a little bit on Saturday, on abortion again, on gun control again, on immunity for Donald Trump again, things related to Donald Trump, on Jan 6 convictions and counts that can be used against Donald Trump and others again. And so while that's all going on, the DC election interference case, even if Judge Chutkan were to get the ruling and it allowed her with some sort of mandate to do something with her case, pick between personal conduct and executive conduct or whatever it is that the Supreme Court rules led by MAGA, if she can get her case restarted, plus the 90 days that she said she's going to give to Trump to restart the case that's been on ice for the last 9 months, she can't start her case till August, maybe even September. Could she get it done before the November election? Maybe. Donald Trump's got no other criminal cases that he's going to be tied up in, so that could happen. But it's getting increasingly less likely, which of course is the end game for the United States Supreme Court to help out Donald Trump this term. Then you got Cannon. Could she have gotten her case up and running off an indictment 2 years ago? Absolutely. That case, because of the less moving parts, that case should have been up and running and tried before the Manhattan DA case, before Georgia, before the DC election interference case was even brought. And yet, you and I and Ben have to talk about the first week in June, a case that is inevitably not going to happen, even on appeals that you outline and I outline, because those appeals are going to be well beyond the time period that we said, which is, again, does Donald Trump have a judge that's trying to bend over backwards to help him out? It's obvious. It's obvious that he does. You want to touch a bit on Hunter Biden and just the 8 months issue?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Hunter Biden case, what strikes me is so ironic is that you've got Hunter Biden, who is being prosecuted by his father's Department of Justice, right? There's no other way to look at this. Joe Biden could have pardoned him. He could have not appointed a special counsel. He could have not allowed this prosecution, right? I mean, Joe Biden has the ultimate authority to do that, but he doesn't. He steps aside and he believes in our institutions. He believes in our criminal justice system. He believes in that preserving our institutions and not allowing partisan politics to infect the justice system is more important than any one person. And so that just goes to show you what a decent person Joe Biden is, and the contrast of what will happen if Donald Trump gets elected. He is going to hand out these pardons like candy. He is going to absolutely pardon himself, and he will go after, as he said, all his political enemies. Just one other thing to just show the difference, the contrast, is that you were pointing out, Hunter Biden was just indicted 6-8 months ago. This case was just brought. How is it already going to trial? Mm-hmm. 8 months ago. How is it already going to trial in such lightning speed? Again, because nobody is out there doing, nobody's out there on the take for Hunter Biden to try to slow it down or the opposite, to kind of get him. They're just letting the system play out. And this is how it works when people don't get involved and when partisan politics is not involved. And that's again, just the contrast between Eileen Cannon and that case, how it's going. And what she's doing there, just so people can see the contrast. It's just unbelievable to me. If you think that Donald Trump would have one of his kids, any of them, Don Jr., on trial and being prosecuted while he's president of the United States, not happening ever. Right? He would never.
Or the first lady, or the first lady. Where was Melania during the entire trial? But First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. Yep, showing up every day to support her stepson along with his sister and all of that. Just shows you the difference between the two parties. Welcome back. Lawyers talking about things they know what they're talking about, the intersection of law and politics. Where are you going to find it? MeidasTouch. and Legal AF. We named it 4 years ago, that for a reason. If you join us on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on major podcast platforms, you'll find out why. If you know all about Legal AF, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate you. I can't thank you enough. Whenever I bump into people on the street, I just want to give them a big hug for being part of our audience, which happens semi-regularly walking around the streets of New York. If you can take that clip, though, and send it off to friends and family and people in your life and ask them to join Legal AF and subscribe to the MeidasTouch Network, that would really be helpful. Pick us up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast from. If you don't know about Legal AF, we curate a show, 4 or 5 stories right at the intersection of law and politics, led by lawyers and the major contributors to Legal AF right here on the MeidasTouch Network. And we invite you to join us for our next episode, Wednesdays and Saturdays. Wednesdays with Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and me, Michael Popok. On Saturdays, I'm joined by my co-founder, Ben Meiselas. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popok reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.